first, let's take the wheel off, 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts. And remove your wheel. Now let's take the axle nut off. Take the cotter pin off to start. Try to unbend it basically and pull it out the other side. There it comes. Okay, take this little cap off. This is what locks in the axle nut. 30mm socket, remove the axle nut. Perfect. Now at this point you want to make sure the axle pushes through the hub. This one does not, and you want to push it through so you can remove it. And typically you'd want to use a punch on the center of the axle and push it through, but we're replacing the axle, so I'm not too worried about these threads. So I'm just going to take a hammer, hammer the axle out that way, and you just want to pay attention to your lug studs, make sure you're not hitting those and damaging the threads. There we go, that broke free. It can push out, that's perfect. Now let's remove this ABS sensor clip here off the knuckle, and then with a 12mm, there's a little bolt here that holds the brake line, or brake hose and ABS wire in place. Go ahead and remove that. Okay, get those off. Then if you follow the ABS wire, you don't actually have to do this, but I prefer doing it just because it gives it more slack. There's a 10mm bolt right here. Remove that as well. And as you can see, this gives the whole wire a lot more slack for when the knuckle wants to drop down. At this point, we can remove these 2 bolts with a 22mm socket. Okay, make sure your wires are out of the way. Hold the bolt side with a 22mm in case it wants to spin, and 22 socket on the nut side. Okay, that's one. Leave the bolt in here for now, and let's remove the bottom one. Get the bottom one off. Okay, the bolts, both of them broke free. Sometimes they get stuck inside the knuckle, but these are free, so that's perfect. Okay, let's get this last bolt out. With this out, the knuckle's going to want to drop down, so keep that in mind. There it goes. That's out. Get your punch out and pull the knuckle down. Make sure it separates off of here. Axle pushes through. Not yet. Hammer it to push it through, just like that. As the knuckle falls down, obviously make sure you're not getting any of these pinched or pulled to where they're not supposed to be. Perfect. I have a collection bucket underneath just in case some transmission fluid comes out. And now I have a pry bar in my hand and I'm ready to pry the axle out of the transmission. Just give it a little pop. There we go. That came right out. Finish prying it out completely. All right, that's out. Now we can come out here, grab the axle, pull it out of the knuckle. Okay, grab the axle, pull it off the knuckle and out of the transmission. And there you have it. Here's your old CV axle. This is the perfect time to replace your axle seal if needed. This one's completely dry, not leaking, so I'm just going to clean off the debris that's around it, and let's get the new axle in. Slide the new axle in, make sure it lines up with the splines, and when you get to that seal there, just make sure you don't actually push on the seal. You don't want to damage it. Kind of guide the axle into place. Twist it if needed to line it up. Okay, at this point I want to grab my rubber mallet and hit the end of the axle. That's going to drive it into the transmission. There we go. That just bottomed out. Give it a couple more taps. That should be in completely. Perfect. Before this goes into the knuckle, I'm going to put some anti-seize on it. That way in the future it doesn't seize up like it did for us. Just on the splines. Perfect. Now put the axle back through the hub. Bring the knuckle up. Make sure your ABS wire doesn't get caught here. Put the knuckle back onto the strut. Might have to bring it up a little bit. If the knuckle doesn't go in all the way, it's probably because the axle isn't lined up with the splines on the hub. So slide that into position. You might need to spin the hub a little bit so it can line up. Okay, axle comes through. Bring this up. Start in one of your bolts. That way it can be held in place. Bolts come in front to back. Okay, that one's in. Let's get the top one in. Push the knuckle in, slide the bolt through, and if it doesn't go through all the way, you can give it a couple taps with your hammer. That usually does the trick. Now let's get the two nuts on. Now snug them up. Okay, now let's torque them to 156 foot-pounds. That's one. Oops. Give it back. And that's two. Awesome. Let's put this axle nut back on, bottom it out, and then the torque is 217 foot-pounds. That's bottomed out. Let's torque it. 217 foot-pounds. I have a pry bar going through the lug studs to prevent the hub from spinning. Oh, perfect. Let's resecure this ABS clip here, and now put everything back onto the knuckle. ABS wire first, and then the brake hose. Start in your 12mm bolt, and then we'll snug it up. Sometimes these brackets don't want to line up right off the bat, so you have to kind of wiggle them around, make sure they're still attached. Perfect. And now, if you did remove this, which again, I suggest that you do, put this back, snug it up. Now let's get the sway bar link reconnected. Let's get the wheel back on. Push it on all the way. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts. Bottom them out. Okay, let's torque them. 76 foot-pounds. Perfect.